Pat Rogers had been pressuring you previously to really prosecute voter fraud cases in New Mexico. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Pat Rogers was kind of a gatekeeper Republican lawyer in Albuquerque, and he had contacted my office, my executive assistant, with allegations of massive voter fraud going on in New Mexico in 2004. So we looked into it. We had asked if he had any additional information. We'd get the FBI to send an agent over, which we did. I think the agent went there twice to interview him. And he just couldn't seem to understand that, you know, U.S. attorneys, prosecutors in general, have to rely on this little thing called evidence. We have to prove our case. We can't just rely on allegations. He never seemed to understand that. And I'll cut him some slack since he'd never been a prosecutor. But Pat was obsessed with the voter fraud issue, and he would leave long, rambling voice messages to my assistant, who was handling the voter fraud investigations. And I later found out that he was representing a group called the American Center for Voting Rights, which appears to be a front organization to probably suppress voters throughout the country. I don't know a whole lot about this organization since Mr. Rogers never told me that he was representing them. But it's something that I think the media is now picking up on. They're looking into this ACBR. There's a guy named Thor Hearn in Kansas City that's involved in it. But that's kind of a long way of answering the question.
But there's a connection as well, because he was interested, if I'm remembering correctly, he was interested in his voter fraud allegations were against a group called ACORN, a social rights group that had been registering voters. This is the same group in which indictments were brought by Bradley Schlosser. So do we have reason to believe that those indictments may also have been similarly pressured?
Yeah, one of the things you have to keep in mind, and this is a DOJ policy going back a long time, you don't file voter fraud indictments right before elections because it tends to impact the outcome of the election. So I was told by Craig Donsanto, who headed up the public integrity section, the voting section, that you don't file indictments close to the election, knowing that can affect the outcome. It makes complete sense to me. So I didn't, even had I had something prosecutable, I would not file it in October, for example. But Schlosser decided that he was going to do that and filed, I think, 4 indictments immediately before the election. And this was after Todd Graves. I don't know if any of you are from Kansas or Missouri, right? But Todd Graves was a colleague of mine who had the opportunity to file voter fraud cases and refused to because, like me, you have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't just indict people. People hanging. And then Graves gets replaced by Schlosser, who then filed, and the brief time he was U.S. attorney, he filed what appeared to be very suspect voter fraud indictments.
Was it communicated to U.S. attorneys when there was the change, when Alberto Gonzalez came in, voter fraud, it's your voter fraud, this is our thing, this is what we're working on?
Well, not that directly. We would get emails during the election years, for instance, in 02 and 04, and then again in 06. Main Justice would, and by Main Justice, I'm sure you all know, I mean the headquarters in Washington, D.C. They would send emails out to every U.S. attorney and just say, please contact the Secretary of State in your respective states, work with them, contact the voting officers, offer your assistance in prosecuting voter fraud cases. I assumed that had been the MO from previous administrations. I've later found out that has not been the case, that there has been increased emphasis on voter fraud investigations and prosecutions.
And we've learned since then that Pat Rogers had, I don't know if we'd say he had a direct line to Karl Rove, but he certainly had access to Karl Rove, as did his colleague, Mickey Barnett, and as well as Alan Way, Republican GOP, had in fact gone to a Christmas party?
Yeah, I think some type of party.
And asked, when are you getting your Iglesias? So, or something.
Right, I think that was December of 06, and then I think the comment was, it's already done.
And you were unaware that any of this was going on behind the scenes?
I had no idea. One of my favorite quotes from Washington, a place I lived and worked for about 5 years, is, in Washington, D.C., your friend stabbed you in the front.
observations of the difference of working for DOJ under Ashcroft versus Gonzalez?
Sure. His staff was a lot more professional. They were older. They were more experienced. I can't imagine Ashcroft putting up with some of the nonsense that Gonzalez did. And I realize that there's lots in this room that probably have some real reservations about the Patriot Act. Ironically, that act was used as a sword against some of us U.S. attorneys. We thought it was anti-terrorism legislation. It turned out they snuck in a provision to allow cronies to be hired as U.S. attorneys, which none of us knew at the time. But I actually found Ashcroft to be a straight shooter. He always knew where he stood. I don't recall from his testimony him relying on I can't remember that. I actually liked working with Ashcroft better than Gonzalez, even though I probably have more in common with Goldberg and Gonzalez.
Some of the firing situation in Arkansas, where Tim Griffin they wanted to appoint him using that provision of the Patriot Act, did that set off any bells for you that things were starting to shift, that there was this politicization going on behind the scenes? Or?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I later found out that the guy that helped write some of the language in the Patriot Act provision that allowed for indefinite interim appointments, thereby avoiding Senate confirmation, was a guy from Utah, Tolman, who is now the U.S. Attorney there. I think that's very troublesome. You want U.S. attorneys, obviously, that share similar ideology with the president, but once you're in office, you're a law enforcement person. You're not a political guy. You're not a political operative. And I think that's something Gonzalez never understood. Ashcroft got it. In fact, when I sat in Ashcroft's office in the summer of 2001, he said, "David, if you get this job, you got to keep politics out." And he's got this gravelly voice and this starched shirt. And, you remember that kind of thing. Gonzalez never said anything like that. In fact, if you have read some of McKay's comments, he remembers a conference two springs ago in which Gonzalez said he worked for the White House, and McKay was appalled. I wasn't paying attention, so I don't remember that. But John definitely remembers that, as do some of my other colleagues. That the shift was working for the people, doing law enforcement cases, to work for the White House. I think that sums it up.
If those of you who were fired for not playing politics, what have you heard? What do you know about the U.S. attorneys who were not fired? Do we assume that they are playing politics?
Not necessarily. I think it's really interesting. There's almost this negative presumption that if you're still in as a U.S. attorney, somehow you're a political hack. And that's just not true of my colleagues. I know a lot of my U.S. attorney colleagues who don't play politics, who are career people, who want to do the right thing. Without naming them, there are a couple that I would not say that about.
So you're not naming them?
No.
Just a state.
I can recall, I can remember, but I won't say.
You, in fact, requested a separate investigation. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and the status of it?
Yeah, I authorized the Office of Special Counsel, which is an independent agency. It's not part of the Justice Department. It's not part of the White House. Its mission is to enforce federal law against federal agencies. It's got no jurisdiction against state and local government or the private sector. When I started seeing that, one of the reasons that they trotted out after the fact to justify my firing was I was an absentee landlord. I figured it had something to do with my Navy Reserve status. I'm still a reservist. I do anywhere from 35 to 45 days of military duty per year. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, we're fighting this war on terror. We need the Guard Reserve. Why would they say I'm gone too much? Especially in the age of the BlackBerry. I mean, you're really not gone. And you know that if it's buzzed at 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it is always on. So I started thinking, I wonder if they're saying I was gone too much doing my military duty. If that's the case, that's a violation of federal law. And this may come as a shock to some people in the Justice Department, but they're under the law too. They're under the same rule of law as everybody else.